Welcome to Good Spirit Graphics. In this tutorial, we're going to be working with Mocha data in Blender's Compositor. We'll be working in this part of MochaBlend's panel. We'll cover stabilizing footage with the result centered, combining images with that stabilized footage, stabilizing and unstabilizing footage in place, and finally, stabilizing a single transform. First up, we're going to stabilize some footage that I created. Here you see an image of a triangle that is moving from the left side to the right side of the screen. This triangle is translating. It is also rotating by about 45 degrees and then back to 0. And it is also scaling. I'm going to show you how to stabilize footage like this inside Blender with MochaBlend. I went ahead and tracked this image already to save us some time, but basically I just drew a spline around the shape that I wanted to track, hit the track button, and Mocha did the rest. Now if I go ahead and scrub the timeline, you'll see that our spline is following it nicely. And if I turn on the blue surface area tool, you'll see I've already set it up to match the limits of the triangle here. The center of this blue surface area is what we're going to export for tracking data. That's the point we're going to stabilize. Now if we want to stabilize a different point, all we have to do is go ahead and duplicate this layer and then move the blue surface area around to the point that we want to stabilize. If we want more than one, just duplicate the layer again and move the surface area to the next point that you want to stabilize. Now let's go ahead and switch back to the layer we want to export here. And you'll see the blue rectangle is rotating and scaling with our shape. So let's go to Export Tracking Data. Let's select After Effects Transform Data and copy to clipboard. Here we are in Blender, and the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and drag and drop the footage that we used in Mocha. So I'm going to just pick it up, drop it into the movie clip editor here. And you'll see here, if we scrub the timeline, we have the same footage. Now let's go ahead and paste our Mocha data in. And you'll see it says we have 30 frames. That's correct. Gives us our format, 1500 by 720. Now sometimes, although it isn't necessary, I like to go ahead and just create a transform tracker. This kind of lets me know that I've matched up my data to the correct footage, and it should follow that point, which is the center of the blue surface area in Mocha, perfectly. That looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and set up the compositor. Now we could just switch to the compositor layout here, but I want to show you what we're doing here with MochaBlend visible. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it on this layout and split our window. Let's go ahead and switch this one to a node editor. Close down this panel here. Then I'm going to split this window one more time and make this an image editor and set this to render output. Now for the node editor, we're going to go ahead and select compositing nodes, select use nodes, make sure that's checked, and first we'll select backdrop just to show you what that does. We'll leave this part of the image visible a little bit here, just so we can match things up and see what's going on. Now when you open the node editor, you'll probably find a couple nodes already in there. This is the default setup for it. It includes a render layers output, which is the output from your camera in the 3D view, and a composite output. This is what's going to put the image here in our render result. Now we're not going to be working in the 3D view, so we're going to go ahead and delete the 3D layers node. We don't need that. And we're going to go ahead and do the stabilization of our image here. Now in this section of MochaBlend's panel under Compositor, we're going to select everything for the first example: translation, rotation, scale, and centered. Let's go ahead and click on Stabilize Footage, and you'll see we get a couple of new nodes. We're going to take our composite output here, and we're going to make this the output for the whole compositor here, under render result. If you go ahead and render out the animation now, you will get the stabilized footage. Now let's see what we have here. If I go ahead and middle mouse wheel zoom out a little bit, let's go to frame 1 and scrub the timeline. Sometimes you have to move it to snap things into place on Blender. It doesn't always auto update. And you'll see our triangle is now in the center of the image. We can monitor the original footage over here. Now as we move through the timeline, you'll see on the original footage it is moving up, but our stabilized triangle in the render result area is perfectly stable. It is not scaling, rotating, or translating at all. MochaBlend has stabilized it perfectly. Now you could just use the backdrop as your view here. It is possible to move around your nodes, also to hold down Alt and hold down your middle mouse button, and you can move around the backdrop. You can move the backdrop sort of zoomed in and out by using V on your keyboard or Alt V. But sometimes this gets in the way, and there is a drawback to it, which is why I showed you this technique. If I go ahead and move to another frame, you'll see my footage has been moved around, but if you look closely, I can't see where my original footage is. I can see it sort of cut off right here. But if I use this method, I can see my original footage size and also see my manipulated image here. So I recommend setting up a separate viewer for the output by connecting your composite node to what you want to view. Now, how is MochaBlend doing this? When you press Stabilize Footage, it takes the image or the image sequence or movie from here, and it creates a footage node. Then it creates a MochaBlend stabilization node, and if we select that and tab into it, I'm going to go ahead and turn off backdrop for a second so it's not so distracting. You'll see that MochaBlend has created a series of nodes that take the Mocha data and stabilize your footage according to your selection on the MochaBlend panel. Now if you look, you'll see there are two outputs for this node group. One is the stabilized footage, and the other, if you follow the node tree, is the stabilized footage with the XY angle and scale adjustments on the front of the node. I'll go ahead and tab out of this group node and show you here what those are. We used this image output, but if we went ahead and used this one, for example, as the output of our composite node, we'll go ahead and return to the regular view here. I did that by holding down Control and the up arrow. You'll see we can use these inputs here to create an offset to our stabilized footage in both translation, angle, and scale. It will still be stabilized just like it was before, but it is offset now according to these settings. If you don't want to make any changes to it, just use the top output of the node here. I'm going to connect that back up because we don't really need this right now. There are many reasons to stabilize footage, but the two main reasons are to stabilize shaky footage and to superimpose something and have it match the transforms of something in the original footage. I'm going to show you how to add something to the original footage now. Let's go ahead and drop the MochaBlend logo into the image editor here, and we're going to create a new node here, an input node, by holding down Shift A. Input, image. Let's go ahead and select that image, MochaBlend logo. Now let's move it over, let's say about here. We'll go ahead and also create an alpha over to combine our images. Under Color, Alpha over. Let's take our stabilized footage, put that in the middle input here. That's going to be the base of our image. Then what we want to put on top is going to go here. Now there's also an alpha channel here, so let's go ahead and select alpha and put this in here, although that may be a mistake. We'll see in just a second. Now let's go ahead and switch this back to render result and take the output of our alpha over, connect that to our composite node, and let's see what happens. Okay, well, it's way too large, first of all, so let's move this over. Now let's correct that with a transform node, Shift A again, and let's go to distort, create a transform node. And before I do that, let's go ahead and disconnect the alpha input here and see what happens. We'll connect the transform node in here, and then go down to scale and scale our image. Okay, well, it looks like we do need our alpha input. But let's try clicking on convert pre-multiply and see what happens there. Okay, looks like we don't need it after all. So now let's go ahead and position our logo where we want. Got to be careful what you're pressing here. You can move it so small you can't even see it. We can also adjust its position here. Let's go ahead and move it down a little bit. Actually, this one's a little more coarse in its adjustment. So let's go ahead and put it in the middle of our triangle. Okay, that looks about right. Now you can see if we scrub the timeline, we haven't reintroduced the original motion back into the shot yet. So let's do that by middle mouse wheel zooming out here so I can show you where it's going to create the new node, and selecting Unstabilize All. Unstabilize All means it's going to undo translation, rotation, and scale. So let's go ahead and click on Create Single Node, and you'll see a new node pops up here. New nodes always pop up in the upper left of the existing nodes in the view here. So let's take the Unstabilize All node, move it down to here, move our alpha over here, zoom in a little bit so we can see what we're doing. Take our final image. Let's go ahead and drop this in here. Now let's go back to the start, and you'll see our superimposed image is matching the position of our triangle. And if we move through the shot, you'll see we now have translation, rotation, and scale of the logo to match the movement of the original footage. Now let me explain the Unstabilize All node in a little more detail. What it does is undo all the changes to the Stabilize Footage node if you have selected all 4 of these choices. Now if I hover over the centered selection, you'll see the tooltip pops up and says, select to center the footage after it has been stabilized. If you didn't click on this option when you selected Stabilize Footage here, then the Unstabilize All node will not work correctly. Let's go ahead and uncheck it and take a look at what stabilized footage looks like with only translation, rotation, and scale. We're going to go ahead and zoom out here. And we're going to look at this viewer node here. Now we don't have backdrop selected. If we do, that viewer's image will pop up here. And if you add more viewers, I'll go ahead and just duplicate it, Shift D. We can connect a viewer anywhere here. And the image that pops up in your backdrop is the one from the selected viewer. Now I showed you already why I like to look at images in the image editor instead of on the backdrop. So let's go ahead and use this trick to switch between different parts of our node tree by selecting Viewer node here in the image editor. Now we can look at images at different points in our node tree simply by clicking on the viewer. Let's go ahead and turn off backdrop to clean it up a little bit and look at something else. Let's make a little more room here by moving this up. Now let's go ahead and stabilize our footage again with centered unselected. You'll see here we got some new nodes here. Let's go ahead and click on this viewer, and let's go back to frame 1, and you'll see now we're going to have stabilized footage with the area that we've stabilized in the same position as it was on frame 1. This is an alternate way to stabilize your footage, and for some applications this will be more useful. Now if you want to unstabilize this motion, you won't be able to use the Unstabilize All node as I mentioned already, but MochaBlend is very flexible and gives you options to do almost anything. We can select Unstabilize Translation, create a single node, and you'll see we'll get a node that will undo just one component of the stabilization. Then you could select Unstabilize Rotation, create a single node, and you'll see we'll get another one. And we could also select Unstabilize Scale, create single node, and we'll get another node. Now you can simply chain these together in the correct order to unstabilize that movement. MochaBlend gives you a lot of options here. You can see you can get individual nodes to center the track, uncenter, stabilize translation, rotation and scale, and unstabilize translation, rotation and scale, as well as the already mentioned Unstabilize All node. Now I'll show you how to use these 3 nodes to undo this stabilization we created. If we go ahead and zoom out a little bit, you'll see we have this stabilized node here. And if you look in the header, it'll tell you what it's doing. This one says T for translation, R for rotation, and S for scale. Now, when you select different combinations of things to stabilize, you can put these selectors in 11 different combinations. What you're doing here will be reflected in the title of the node here. That way you can keep track of what you did. Now let's look inside this node to see what it's doing. I'm going to select it. I'm going to tab to look inside the group, and then I'm going to press Control up arrow to make this full screen. Now if we look inside this node, you will see we have several things linked together, and it starts off with translation, then rotation, then scale, then it makes a centering adjustment. We're going to do this in the reverse order to unstabilize it. So let's go ahead and tab out of the group. We were looking inside this group a second ago. That's what you're doing. When you see the blue screen, you're looking inside an area. Now let's tab outside and hook it up to unstabilize the stabilization. Now we're going to need a couple more nodes than just these 3. So let's go ahead and get out of full screen mode by pressing Control up arrow again. We're going to need a center track node. We'll create that one. And we're going to also need an uncenter track node. So let's go ahead and create that one. Now we have all the nodes we need to go ahead and unstabilize it. So let's go ahead and make it full screen again. And first thing we're going to do is hook up the center track node. I'm not going to go into all the details of transformational math here, but first we need to center it to undo the other things. Now in reverse order, we're going to do unstabilize scale first. Then we're going to do unstabilize rotation. Then we're going to do unstabilize translation. And then we're going to uncenter, which should put things back the way they were. Now let's get out of full screen mode here. Let's put this viewer, let's just duplicate it actually, and put another one here so we can look at our output. Now if I move through the frames to update the compositor, you'll see everything is back the way it was in the original footage. We have now successfully unstabilized all the things that were stabilized by this first node. If we click between the 2 viewers, you'll see here is the stabilized footage. And on the same frame, if we go back, here is the unstabilized footage. Back the way it was at the start. Now let's take a look at another example. This time we'll just stabilize the scale. Let's click on Stabilize Footage. And if you see here, we'll click on the viewer. You'll see our object is now moving as it originally did, but it's not scaling anymore. Now let's go ahead and combine that with the original footage so we can see what it's doing. Let's add a mix node. Let's take our original output from our footage and we'll put that as the base. And then on top of that, we'll take our stabilized footage and put it here. Now let's go ahead and connect our viewer up, and then we'll change the mix factor here to about 50%. And now if we move through our footage, let's select that viewer, we should see two images. The original footage, and then you'll see the footage with no scaling. The scaling will be based on the first frame of the image, and you'll see it's working very well.